The world is facing big challenges. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, imagine a network of communities coming together to find solutions. We'll discover how these local heroes are making a difference in tackling global risks like poverty, inequality, and environmental threats. Stay tuned, and as always, stay safe.
All right, so let's dive into all these reports and articles about global risks. But what's really interesting is how much they focus on local solutions.
Yeah, there's this assumption that global problems need these huge top-down solutions, governments and international organizations coming in. But what's fascinating is how effective local communities can be.
Totally. And we're not talking about small-scale projects here.
Yeah.
We're talking about community health networks during pandemics, villages in Indonesia preparing for earthquakes, and even islands in Denmark powered by solar energy.
Yeah, and speaking of challenges, the Global Risks Report 2025 that you sent paints a pretty stark picture. It's not just one issue, it's how they're all connected.
Right.
Climate change is obviously still a major threat, but then you have economic instability and technological disruption all feeding into each other.
Right, so it's like a domino effect. If they
Truly.
say a climate disaster hits a region that's already struggling economically, suddenly you've got forced migration, food insecurity, maybe even conflict.
Exactly, and to make matters worse, you highlighted this stat, only 10% of global climate finance actually reaches local communities.
Yeah, it's like we're saying those communities are the most vulnerable.
Yeah.
But they're the least equipped to adapt.
Exactly.
It's like fighting a fire with a garden hose when the real firefighters are stuck using buckets.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And there are a few reasons why local solutions deserve more attention. For one thing, they're context-specific.
Okay, so they're tailored to the specific challenges and opportunities of that community.
Exactly like those community-led reforestation projects.
Right.
They're not just planting trees, they're carefully choosing species that are right for the local ecosystem, involving the community and making sure those forests are managed sustainably for the long term.
It's all about that local knowledge, right? I was reading about Indigenous communities using their traditional knowledge to predict and prepare for disasters. And in some cases, they're more accurate than any high-tech model.
Absolutely. That local knowledge is invaluable, and it's often overlooked by those big top-down approaches.
And if a local solution works, it can be replicated and adapted elsewhere, like that transition towns movement.
Yeah.
Started small in England, and now it's a global network of communities working towards sustainability and resilience.
Absolutely. And that brings us to what makes these local initiatives so exciting. They're building resilience from the ground up.
Okay, so let's break that down.
All right.
What does it actually mean to build resilience at the community level?
Well, think about strengthening the social fabric, the community's ability to bounce back from shocks. It's about social cohesion, empowering people, and making sure everyone has a role to play in building a secure future.
So it's not just about surviving, it's about thriving, even in the face of global risks.
Precisely. And there are a few key elements to this. First, you have social cohesion. Strong community networks built on trust and mutual aid make a huge difference when disaster strikes. It's often neighbors helping neighbors before any official help arrives.
Right. A perfect example is Kenya's Greenbelt movement. It's not just about planting trees. It's about empowering women, strengthening social bonds. I mean, they've planted millions of trees, and it's had this ripple effect on poverty reduction and even political participation.
Yeah, it shows how addressing a seemingly local issue like deforestation can have these much broader benefits.
And it's not just reacting to crises, right? These initiatives are also about managing resources sustainably.
Absolutely. Communities that actively manage their ecosystems, like their forests and fisheries, are much better prepared to face environmental risks. They understand that connection between environmental health and human well-being, and they're taking ownership of those resources.
And I imagine that sense of ownership creates a deeper connection between the community and its environment. It's not just about it's about stewardship, about making sure those resources are there for future generations.
Exactly. And you see that in practices like agroecology, where farmers use traditional knowledge and ecological principles to create resilient farming systems. They're less reliant on chemicals and better adapted to climate change.
No, it's like tackling multiple challenges at once, improving food security, protecting the environment, and building resilience to climate change.
Exactly.
That's awesome.
Absolutely. And another piece of the puzzle is capacity building.
Right. You need the skills and the organizational capacity to turn good intentions into action.
Precisely. And a lot of local initiatives are doing great work here. They're running training programs on flood-resistant farming disaster preparedness, equipping communities with the tools they need to adapt and respond effectively.
So it's about empowering people to be part of the solution, not just passive recipients of aid.
Exactly. It's about fostering that sense of agency and self-reliance, which is crucial for long-term resilience.
So how do we connect this amazing local action with global strategies?
Yeah, it's like we've got these two parallel universes that need to merge somehow.
Exactly.
And finding that point of convergence is key to a more resilient future for everyone.
Yeah, it's like we're living in two different worlds. You have these amazing local initiatives doing such great work, and then you have these global institutions trying to tackle these massive interconnected risks. So it's not just about making those local solutions bigger. It's about weaving them into how we manage global risks. It's about recognizing that those communities aren't just people who need help. They're essential partners in creating a more resilient future.
Exactly. And there are some encouraging signs that this integration is starting to happen. Remember that statistic we talked about, only 10% of climate finance reaching local communities? Well, there are initiatives like the UN's Local 2030 initiative that are trying to change that.
Right. Local 2030,
Right.
it's all about connecting those local efforts with the Sustainable Development Goals, recognizing that to achieve those global goals, we need to empower communities to be part of the solution. But how does that actually work?
Well, it has a few different parts. For one, it's about creating platforms for dialogue and collaboration, bringing together local communities, national governments, and international organizations so they can share knowledge, coordinate strategies, and make sure their efforts are aligned.
So it's about breaking down those walls, creating spaces where those different groups can actually learn from each other, understand each other's perspectives, and work together.
Exactly. And it's also about shifting power dynamics, recognizing that those closest to the challenges often have the most innovative and effective solutions.
Which brings us back to that funding issue. How do we make sure those local initiatives get the financial support they need? We talked about the Green Climate Fund briefly. Are there other options out there?
Absolutely. The Green Climate Fund is a good start, but there are also community foundations, philanthropic organizations, even crowdfunding platforms that are specifically focused on supporting grassroots initiatives.
So it's not just about relying on those big international donors. It's about diversifying the funding landscape, creating more opportunities for local communities to access resources directly.
Exactly. And there are some really cool models emerging, like Kenya's FLOCA program, the Fund for Local Climate Action.
Okay, I haven't heard of that one. Tell me more.
Well, it's basically a decentralized funding mechanism that sends climate finance directly to local communities. They have a strict process for choosing projects, but the key is that the decisions are made at the local level by people who understand the needs and priorities of their communities.
So it's about giving power to those who can use it best. That makes sense. But funding is only one part, right? We also need to make sure those communities have the capacity to manage those resources effectively to turn those funds into real outcomes.
You're absolutely right. Capacity building is essential. And it's not just about technical skills. It's about leadership development, organizational management, financial literacy, all the things that empower communities to implement those solutions sustainably.
So it's about investing in people and their ability to lead, to organize, to manage resources. It's about building those skills and knowledge that will help communities take ownership of their own development, their own resilience.
Precisely. And technology can play a really powerful role here.
Okay, let's talk technology. How is technology helping to bridge that local-global divide?
Well, for one thing, it's making it easier for local communities to connect with each other, to share knowledge and experiences, to learn from each other's successes and failures. There are online platforms and mobile apps specifically designed for community organizing, for sharing best practices, for coordinating disaster response.
So it's like creating these virtual networks of resilience where communities can tap into a global pool of knowledge and support.
Exactly. And technology is also helping to improve data collection and analysis at the local level. There are participatory mapping tools that allow communities to document their own risks and vulnerabilities, to monitor environmental changes, to track the progress of their initiatives.
So it's about giving communities the power to tell their own stories, to share their own data, to make their voices heard. And that data can then be used to improve those global risk models to influence policy decisions at the national and international level.
That's right. It's about closing that feedback loop, making sure that local knowledge and experiences are shaping those big picture strategies. But it's important to remember that technology is just a tool. It can amplify those local solutions, but it can't replace the hard work, the dedication, the ingenuity of those communities.
It's about finding that balance where technology supports and enhances those human efforts, not replaces them. So we've talked about funding capacity, building technology, but what about the human element? What about the importance of collaboration, of partnerships, of building trust between all those different groups?
That's a great point, because in the end, resilience isn't just about systems and structures. It's about people. It's about building relationships, fostering trust, and creating a shared vision for the future.
It's about recognizing that we're all in this together, that we need to work together to overcome these global challenges.
Exactly. And that means breaking down those barriers between different sectors, between government agencies, NGOs, businesses, community groups. It means creating spaces where those different actors can come together as equals to share their knowledge, their resources, their perspectives.
So it's about having a more inclusive and collaborative approach to managing risks, one that recognizes the value of different perspectives, that empowers communities to be active participants in shaping their own futures.
Precisely. And I think that's where we're starting to see real progress. There's a growing understanding that those top-down, one-size-fits-all approaches just don't work. We're seeing a shift towards more decentralized, more participatory, more community-driven models of risk management.
And that's really encouraging because it suggests that we're finally starting to understand what resilience really means. It's not just about bouncing back. It's about bouncing forward, about creating a more equitable, sustainable, and thriving future for everyone.
Well said. And that brings us to the question of what all this means for the future. Where do we go from here? How do we build on this momentum? How do we make sure that these local solutions become the norm, not the exception?
That's a great question, and one I'm really interested in exploring further. It's inspiring, isn't it? We've seen these amazing examples of communities tackling global challenges head on.
Yeah, and what's exciting is it's not just like isolated cases anymore. There's this real groundswell of local action happening worldwide.
Right, but we can't just expect individual communities to solve these huge interconnected problems on their own. We need a bigger shift.
Exactly. We need to figure out how to connect those local solutions with global strategies.
So how do we actually make that happen? What are the concrete steps?
Well, first we have to rethink funding. We can't keep throwing money at those same old top-down approaches and expect things to change. We need to get those resources, those billions of dollars, directly to communities on the front lines.
So it's about decentralizing funding, letting local organizations decide how to use those resources.
Exactly. They're the ones who know what works in their communities.
It reminds me of those community-owned solar microgrids in India. They didn't wait for the government to bring them electricity. They took charge and created their own energy independence.
Exactly. That's a perfect example. And there are models out there showing how we can do this on a larger scale, like Kenya's FLOCA program. It channels climate finance directly to local communities.
And we're seeing similar things pop up everywhere. Community foundations, crowdfunding platforms, all designed to support grassroots projects.
Right. It's about giving local organizations more options and more control. But funding alone isn't enough. We also need to address those capacity gaps.
Because even with the best intentions, you need the skills and the organizational capacity to make things happen.
Absolutely. We need to invest in training and education to help communities develop the skills they need to create and implement those solutions.
And it's not just about technical skills, right? It's also about leadership, about empowering people to become leaders in their communities.
Yeah, exactly. It's about creating a new generation of leaders who understand these complex challenges and who can mobilize their communities and advocate for their needs.
So where does technology fit into all of this? How can technology help us scale up these local solutions?
Technology can be a game changer. It can connect communities across borders, helping them share knowledge, best practices, and resources.
It's like creating this global network where communities can learn from each other's successes and failures.
Exactly. And technology can also help us collect and analyze data at the local level. It gives communities the tools to track their progress and document their own risks and vulnerabilities.
It's about giving those communities a voice and making sure their experiences and knowledge are part of policy decisions at all levels.
Exactly. It's about making sure those global strategies are connected to what's happening on the ground. But we also have to be careful about the digital divide. We need to make sure these technologies are accessible to everyone.
Because technology should be a tool that empowers people, not excludes them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But even with funding capacity and technology, we can't forget about the human element, the importance of collaboration, trust, and strong partnerships.
Because ultimately it's people who drive change. It's about building relationships, fostering trust, and working together towards a shared vision.
It's about recognizing that we're all in this together. We need to break down those barriers between governments, NGOs, businesses, and communities, and work together to create a more resilient world.
A world where those most affected by these global challenges are empowered to create their own solutions.
That's the key. It's about shifting power and making sure local voices are heard and their knowledge is valued.
So it's a whole new way of thinking.
Yeah.
Moving away from that old top-down model towards a more collaborative and participatory approach.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the incredible strength and resourcefulness of communities around the world and supporting them to create the future they want.
It's really inspiring to see this movement growing. It gives me hope that we can actually address these global challenges, not just survive them, but create something better.
I'm optimistic too. And what's even more encouraging is that it's not just about reacting to crises anymore. It's about creating a better future, a more just and sustainable world for everyone.
That's a goal worth working towards. And I think this deep dive has shown us that it's a goal within our reach. If we empower communities, if we invest in their capacity, if we make sure those local voices are heard, then we can create a more resilient future for all of us.